Welcome, and it's now good evening. We're sorry it's not morning like it was supposed to be. It seems like the tech gremlins are still hard at work. Getting to co-host two people between two different systems doesn't seem to be working. So we are going to record both today and tomorrow and have it ready for you. So we're very sorry this is so late, but we hope you'll still get a chance to watch it. And you can watch tomorrow's as well, as it will be recorded, but we will put it on at the right time because we'll have it already done. So we're very sorry and apologize that, we tried our best and it didn't happen. So here we are.
And that we're good at coaching. We're just not good at tech.
Yes, we're very good at coaching. We're very good at energy work. We're just not quite so good at tech. And when we get we do have the website set up and the groups for the coaching, so it won't be happening there because we have that already all organized and set up. It's just Facebook who's given us trouble. It doesn't particularly like to have co-hosting if you're not both on the same platform. And so anyway, welcome. We're glad you're here. Yesterday, we talked about what is resilience. We talked about the various components of it and things like a positive attitude and the right diet and following your values and becoming fearless and all the things that go into a resilient lifestyle. But we also said that story has a lot to do with it. So today we want to talk all about what we meant by that, because story is a big part of it. And we're going to tell our own stories a little bit and then use them as examples through the lesson today. But we also want you to start thinking about how your story is going in your head, because you're going to get a chance to respond to that too. So I'm going to ask Cheryl to share some of her story first, and then I'll tell you a little of mine.
Well, my story goes back to 2006 when my life blew up. I'd been married for 26 years. I had 12 children who were aged 15 months to 22 years at the time. And within a 5-week period, I put my children into school because I'd been homeschooling up to that point for 18 years. 2 weeks into the school year, my marriage blew up. And then 3 weeks after that, I was kicked out of my church community, along with everybody else in my church. So it wasn't. I had learned a form of energy medicine that I was using called kinesionics. And it was I went from being a housewife who had all the skills necessary for serving coffee at Tim Hortons, but that wasn't going to be enough to sustain my family. So fortunately, at the same time that happened, I had an opportunity arise where I was able to use my kinesionics to start building my own business. And but there was still a component that was missing. Part of that component was something that filled in through learning how to do natural bioenergetics. And the reason it was so important was because while the kinesionics was dealing with the physical aspects of supporting the body's proper function, it didn't do anything for the psychology or the emotional wreck I had become. And I was very fortunate through a series of events to get connected with a coach. And I originally signed up with him to be a business coach, but he ended up being more of a life coach for me. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for Shane. He taught me how to think correctly about my life. When I came to him, I was in full-blown victim mode. And he was actually the one that showed me the difference between being a victim and being an owner of my life. And I have a funny story to tell about that. One of the books that he assigned for me to read was one called Secrets of the Millionaire Mind by T. Harv Eker. So my assignment for that particular week was I was supposed to go home and read this book about what's the difference between people who are prosperous between those who are not. And I think I made it into the book about 4 or 5 chapters. And when I came back to see him the next week, he's like, so how did it go with the book? And I'm like, I don't like this book and I'm not reading it. And he says, really? I said, yeah, I'm done. I'm not reading it. He says, why not? And I said, well, I got to this chapter where he talks about the difference between poor and rich people. He says, poor people are victims and they, their life is hard and things happen to them. And people who are more prosperous, they own what they have. They own the results that they get from the decisions they make. And he says, okay. And what was your problem with that? And I said, I don't want that much responsibility for my life.
Honesty is for the soul, right?
Yeah. He laughed his face off at me.
I can imagine he would have.
Fortunately, we were able to get past it. But I have to tell you, where I really started to make strides was when I was introduced to natural bioenergetics and the energy component of why we get stuck in the way that we end up thinking. And one of the things that the energy medicine did was I knew I had problems in how I was thinking, but trying to will myself out of thinking in those patterns was really difficult. Like it was like slogging through frozen mud. And when we did the energy work, what the energy work did was it went in and identified a lot of the subconscious triggers that I wasn't even aware of that were in my background, my thinking. They weren't up here where I could see them. They were in the back. And they were the things that were driving my bus. So when they were brought up to the light and we did a correction around them that dropped the stress of them out of my system, what that did was it created this big space for me to actually implement all the stuff I was learning through my coaching. All the proper patterns of thinking were much easier to do after I'd had the energy work. So I'm a big proponent of energy work, and I'm a big proponent of coaching because I just know how valuable they are from my own experience. And it's one of the reasons that I agreed to work with Linda on this is just because I love working with people and coaching them and doing the energy medicine with them, because I see the huge changes that it makes in their lives. And it's such a thrill to be a part of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Cheryl. That's really good. And, you're the kind of client that I would have fired if they did that to me and not been willing to address it and not been willing to work forward and work through it. And I have fired clients over things like that, because if you're unwilling to do the work, then you can't make the progress. So, that's really interesting. But the fact that you were willing to stick in there and do the work and make those changes really, really speaks volumes to the quality of your coach, for one, and the determination of you to make this work, because you had a family to support. And you suddenly had a life to organize and live that you didn't have the skills to do.
Well, I think one of the most important aspects of coaching that makes it work is that most of us, when we reach adulthood, don't have anybody to be answerable to. Mm-hmm. And so we may want to make progress. And I would say to Shane, I can't believe I'm paying you money to kick my ass every week. Like, I would go in there, but there's an old proverb that says, the kisses of an enemy are deceitful, but faithful are the wounds of a friend. And Shane became more than my coach. He actually became my friend. And one of the reasons I trusted him was because he cared enough about me to tell me the truth about myself, because he cared about me and he wanted to see me do better. And that's what made the difference. And I was willing to listen to him and to follow his guidance, even though he did have to kick me in the ass a few times to get me where I needed to go. So
great. And that really highlights the three components of what we're trying to do. We have the coaching aspect, we have the energy medicine aspect, and we have the community aspect, where it really matters that you build a solid personal relationship with the people that you're working with, whether that's through the energy medicine or through the coaching, and between each other. And this is a group where we can work together and help each other on this. It's not all about us being the experts. It's about developing a community of people who want to really figure out how to live a resilient, joyful, happy life in the circumstances they find themselves in, which often aren't very joyful or happy. And so that really shows it well. So my story is very different. I got into energy medicine because of my children. I have 2 children who are now adults, but at the time were, their whole lives they were sick. They were had suffered a number of different accidents and injuries, but they were just not well their entire life. Ear infections, sinus infections, pneumonia, allergies up the, I had one who was allergic to everything you could breathe and one who was allergic to everything you could eat. So, like he grew up with 5 foods basically that didn't make him sick. And the other one, every time we went outside, he'd come back. And there were times we lived in an area where they grew corn, and there were times during the corn season that we actually had to leave the valley and go down to the coast because he couldn't be in the valley when the pollen came out. His eyes would swell up so bad they were practically popping out of his head. We had him on oxygen sometimes if we didn't get out soon enough. It was awful. And so I got into this because our kids required it, because I didn't know what else to do. The medical system had no answers to it. So I dove deep into this stuff as soon as I found out about it. And in that process, we were living in Peru at that time, and we moved back to Canada, and my kids were going through not only all this allergy stuff and illness and sickness, but culture shock and a new language and a new school system and a new social culture. And needless to say, it was a very rough couple of years. And I tried various different coaches, actually. I had a number of different coaches over those couple of years, most of whom didn't do a whole lot for me, to tell you the honest truth. One of whom was, I would say, quite abusive, actually. I fired her after about 3 months. A number of different coaches that, we'd be working together and I'd end up coaching them. It was like, this is just not working. I'm not paying you to help you. But eventually I found one that was amazing, who knew what she was doing, who was right on, who I still talk to regularly, still pay for coaching regularly through her. But it took me a long time to find the right coach. And I think that's an experience many people have. And it was kind of like through that period, like, why am I doing this? What's wrong with me? Why everybody else says these are such wonderful people? Why is this happening the way it is? Like, I must be the problem. It's like, I must be an awful person. I must be all these belief patterns going through my head about how it was my fault. It was me. I was, there was, everybody else loved these coaches, but they didn't work for me. And so I had to have been the problem. And it was during actually a natural bioenergetics session that one of my instructors was doing for me as a private session between classes. And some of the corrections that came up was, I have the wisdom to know who's right for me. And that was like, blew the lid off of all kinds of things. Because one, I didn't trust my own wisdom. I grew up in what I now see as a pretty cultic religious background. At the time, I didn't think it was, but now looking from the outside, it appears quite like that. I spent many years in religious work, working for a nonprofit, and discovered all kinds of things that from the outside are clearly abusive and inappropriate, and definitely not the way people should have been treated. But I was taught that that's just the way it was, and because, well, you were serving God and that's just the way it was. And I'm this relatively smart, very driven, creative. I had big visions and big goals. I had I'm very good at systems and systematizing and figuring out a structure and a way forward. And those were all skills that were not appreciated. Those were all skills that made me an outcast in the group, and certainly was not seen as someone who was contributing. Rather, I was seen as the troublemaker and the person who asked the wrong questions because those questions weren't supposed to be asked, and all this kind of stuff. And it wasn't until that correction where suddenly my wisdom was okay, and I could trust myself and I could trust my own intuition, and I knew what was right for me, and it was okay to know what was right for me and say no to other people. Suddenly it was like night and day difference. I fired my coach immediately again. And at that point decided, you know what? I need to not only, I was already a practitioner in natural bioenergetics. I said, I need to learn how to teach this. I need to start teaching. This is something where I have a way forward. But I also need a new coach. I need a better coach. I need a coach who understands and can work with somebody who has my approach to life and my skill set and my ability to organize and plan and bring a goal and vision into fruition and actually create something out of it rather than just have it and, you know, talk about it and not do anything, which is what a lot of people get stuck in. And so it took me a long time. I interviewed probably 10 coaches before I chose one. But when we started working together, it was like, wow. And she understands energy work, and she'll say, okay, so here's this question. I want you to think about this, or I want you to do this, but you need to go and do a session for yourself or have someone do a session around that, because here's where your thinking is blocked, or here's where your emotions are blocked, or here's where you're facing a wall that you don't know what to do with. Go and do a session on that. And things just snowballed so fast, and things smoothed out so fast. And even now, like when putting together the Natural Bioenergy Institute, which I'm now guiding, and a huge change in approach, building a huge team of volunteers that are working, doing all this kinds of stuff. She is the one who I go to and say, okay, don't know what to do here. And she'll just ask the right questions. Then she'll say, you know what? You need to move forward there, but you've got some fears in that area here. You need to face this fear. And she'll identify it for me. So then I'll go do a session on it. And bingo, things go away and on we charge. And it's been such an amazing process to marry the two, that when we started talking about doing a coaching program, we knew that it had to have the components of all these, of the community, of the energy medicine, and of the coaching, because that's what's worked for both of us.
Yeah.
And it's helped us change our stories. Instead of me being oh, poor me, nobody likes me, which I thought a lot growing up. And I wasn't the most popular kid in school because, well, unless you're, you know, a girly girl that does those kinds of things, you're not usually in. I wasn't. I was a tomboy who rode horses and shot bows and arrows and went canoeing. And, you know, I wasn't the kind of person that made the popularity list at school. And I also skipped schools a lot and jumped around a lot. My father worked in construction internationally. And so, you know, it wasn't moving from town to town. It was moving country to country. Doesn't lend to long-term friends. And so I had some issues around those things that I had to deal with. And this is what allowed me to change that story, to look back on my past instead of going, oh, poor me, this was terrible. You know, how could my parents have done this to me? Look back and go, wow, what an education that was. What a ability to learn about the world and see how different cultures work, and to reframe the whole story into, this has created everything I need to be who I need to be today. And I think that's really been a huge mind shift that's come out for me through the NV and through the coaching, that allows me to say, you know, all those things that other people go, oh, how awful. It's like, you know, at the time it might have been hard, but it's really made me who I am now. And I needed those challenges. I needed those options. I needed those abilities to develop in order to be able to bring forth what we're bringing forth now. And that's all this bit about story. So how you look at what's going on and how you interpret it is really key here to all of this.
Yeah, I agree. We can't change people's stories in terms of, we can't change what happened to them in the past. What happened happened. But the really cool thing about this type of work is you can completely change the story and how you look at it. And all the things that you thought were detriments were actually things that work for you if you let it. So
Right.
Let's talk about that. You're going to bring up the...
Do this.
Okay.
It's all yours.
All right. All right. Do you want to switch to the... So here we again have the definition of what resilience is. And basically it's about being able to bounce back from whatever life throws at you, even the negative stuff. So you see how cheerful we are bouncing back after our debacle this morning with the technology. Everyone has a story. It's inevitable. We all have a way that we talk about our lives and how we interpret what happens to us. And if you go to the next slide, one of the things that distinguishes us from animals is the fact that we have self-awareness. Self-awareness is our ability to separate ourselves from our thoughts and our moods and behaviors and evaluate ourselves, looking at ourselves from the outside. An animal doesn't do that, but people can. So one of the things that's necessary for
just took a long time.
There we go.
Sorry.
One of the things that's necessary for moving forward in your life is being able to have honest, non-judgmental self-analysis. And we have a tendency to either berate ourselves for our failings and think that we're terrible people and create all kinds of self-talk about how I can't do it, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve. Or we could fantasize about how great we are when neither one is the case.
I'm going to throw in a quick little story here because when I was looking at this morning, it popped into my mind and it's just still kind of there. When we're talking about what does story have to do with this non-judgmental self-analysis, I remember how many times my kids, we'd be at the park or the playground or whatever, and they're very active, rambunctious little boys, and they'd trip or they'd fall or whatever. And I've seen it with so many other kids as well. And they trip or they fall, and they take a quick glance at mom to see how mom's reacting. If mom's, oh, okay, hop up, go on, you're fine. They hop up and on they go, and no big deal. But if mom goes, oh no, you fell, are you okay? Then, and they're terrible and everything hurts and it's a big problem. And it's all about what's the story there. The story is, oh, that was just a little trip. You're fine. Don't worry about it. Just carry on. Or, oh no, you must be hurt. Let me check. Are you bleeding? Is there a broken bone? Are you okay? Did you get a bruise? Do I need to, can I have a hug? That's the story that we add on to the activity. The activity was just a little fall. They tripped over something, big deal. And yet the environment gives them the cues on what story they should put onto it. And that story then determines their actions.
So one of the biggest problems that we deal with is that while we see the visible results that we're getting from all these traits, the part that drives our thoughts and behaviors is largely unseen and sometimes even unknown to us.
Yeah, very much. And it's all that what we call subconscious, but many times it's not even subconscious. It's the instinctual limbic brain stress-based responses that drive it. And those aren't just subconscious thoughts. Those are actually emotions that are trapped somewhere in the energy system that hold the memory of a time when it was a problem. And as soon as the stress happens, the frontal cortex executive center stops doing much because the stress response went off and fight or flight kicks in, and that those limbic responses come up and they start saying, oh, well, this is the same as that. See, that happened there, that was terrible. And even though you're not at the same situation, it's not the same thing, the danger is not the same, the brain goes, oh, you better be careful, that's going to happen again. And we fall into that old story and bring it into the present and put ourselves back into a trauma that doesn't actually apply to what's going on right now. And these negative traits come from all that old stored energy that's stuck throughout our biofield, both physically and emotionally and mentally and spiritually, that then keep pulling those old stories into the present and applying the same reaction to a different situation. And, you know, those negative and positive traits happen so unaware that we don't know that that's what we're doing.
It's interesting that my coaching session that I had today with my coach was actually around something like that. And I got myself stuck on the weekend over a situation I was involved in. And we have a deal where if I get stuck, I'm allowed to call him and get help. And so I phoned him and he coached me through it. And then today when we were discussing it, one of the things that he explained to me is that we have habitual ways of thinking. And so they're triggered. We have a habitual way of thinking because our brains are really efficient at going down the pathways that we've established. And what that does is it creates a frozen brain and it creates a leg hold trap that we create for ourselves. And what we need to do is we have to figure out ways to get out of that mindset and open the brain back up so that other possibilities of fixing a situation are available to us. So people are meaning-making machines. So something happens and we make it mean something. And then the meaning is used to create a story about why the thing happened or why we are a certain way. And then once we have that meaning and story in place, we will recruit other people to our story by telling it. And the more people we tell the story to, and the more people agree with our story, the more valid the story seems to us. And I like to use an illustration of a woman who's decided that she's going to do a really great thing for her husband. She's decided that because he's been working so hard, she's going to create his favorite meal. And this guy is really regular in his habits. So every night he comes home and he's home by 5:30 on the dot. So she knows she can plan a meal and have it ready for 5:30 and everything will be great. So she goes out, she buys his favorite steak, she puts it aside and marinates it so it'll be perfect when she cooks it. She sets the table with the best crystals, she gets flowers, she creates a romantic atmosphere. Well, 5:30 comes and the husband doesn't come through the door. And she's like, I wonder where he is. So she tries phoning him and it goes right straight to voicemail. So she sends him a text and there's no response. So 6:30 comes around. She tries phoning again, still goes to voicemail. Now she's starting to get a bit concerned and the supper's starting to get wrecked. 6:30 comes and now she's thinking, you know, he's mentioned that there's this new girl at the office. I wonder if they've gone out for drinks or something. 7 o'clock comes, he's still not home, still no response. 7:30, he finally struggles through the door and he meets the Ice Queen. Because she's created in her head this huge scenario about what happened. What really happened was he got sent out on a service call. He's out in an area where he doesn't have good cell reception. And on top of that, he forgot his thing to charge his phone and the phone was dead. So everything went to voicemail and he got no text messages. And he gets a flat tire. And because he's out in a remote area, there's nobody coming along. And when he goes to change his tire, even the donut's flat. So he has to wait till he gets a farmer who picks him up, takes him into town, gets him a taxi to get him sent home and deal with his vehicle. Her reality that she'd created in her mind had nothing to do with what actually happened to him. But for her, it was truth and gospel, and it created all the emotions that when he came through the door, hit him like an Arctic breeze. So getting control of our stories and recognizing that we just automatically make a story about what happens is one of the key components to learning how to control the narrative that drives your life. So further complicating the issue, that is our perception that we have of ourselves, is also formed from the opinions, the perceptions, and the paradigms of people around us. You're never on time. You eat like a horse. It's simple. Why can't you understand this? Things that are said to us at a vulnerable point in time can really stick with you. I can remember being 12 years old, and at the time, my parents and I, we lived in the States, and we would come up every year to New Brunswick to see my grandparents. And one of the first things my grandmother said when she saw me was, "Well, you're quite chubby now, aren't you?" Not a great thing to say to a 12-year-old who's on the cusp of puberty. And that stuck with me for a long time. Probably still does. We might have to fix that.
We probably have some corrections we can do around that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this distorted self-image. I mean, I saw that in myself so much, because here I saw myself as smart, intelligent, ambitious, career person. And the nonprofit I worked for saw me as a very different person, and the things that they would say and the things that they would do, and the ways that they would try to undermine that, because, well, women weren't supposed to be smart and ambitious and career women. They were supposed to be at home looking after the children and doing what they're supposed to do. And, you know, women getting in the way is not really what they wanted at that point. And it started to distort my own image of myself. And I lost a lot of confidence, and I lost a lot of the ability to do things. And I began just to do much more routine work because, well, that's what I was expected to do. And that was the only way I would get any affirmation or any recognition at work, was for, you know, being a good little woman who did what we were supposed to do. And, you know, let my husband do the upfront stuff, and let him be the one who gets the, and it was like, you know, when we finally left there and got an outside perspective of it, and I realized how distorted that had all become, and how distorted my self-image had become, and how hard and how angry I had become because of that. And I think so much of the anger that we have internally is because of that distorted self-image, because we're told to be somebody we're not, and we're pushed to be something we're not, and we don't have the affirmation and the recognition for who we are and what we want to do. But, well, we're meeting our social roles, and we're doing what our families expect us to do, and we're doing what our culture expects us to do, and all these things. And you become so distorted, you don't know who you are anymore. You really, I mean, it took me a while to figure out who I was again after leaving that nonprofit. And, you know, I see it so often in women now. And it's not just because I was working in a religious nonprofit. It happens. I see it in big corporations. I see it in entrepreneurs, where they're expected to be all these things, and their brilliance is lost in the having to fill all these roles for whom they are not. And this distorted self-image really has a huge impact on how we function. And we begin to tell ourselves the story that, well, we're not good enough, that we're not worthy, that we don't deserve this, that all these things. And so much of it comes out of this distorted self-image.
One of the things that I see a lot of is people who feel like they don't have a right to take up space on the planet. It's okay for everybody else to exist, but their needs, their wants, their desires, their gifts, their abilities, there's not really room for them. And so they go around apologizing for even being there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So many women that I've worked with in sessions, whether they're coaching or, well, my sessions are always a mix of energy medicine coaching. I don't really separate them out anymore. But so many of them, it's like when you ask, what is your desire? If your life could be the way you wanted to be, what would it look like? And you get this deer in the headlights look like. They have no clue. It is so far gone under the weight of all the responsibilities and everybody else's expectations and this distorted self-image that's happened because of so many other people's pushing on them and so little attention to themselves that they have no clue who they are. And those are the kind of people for which this can make huge strides very, very quickly.
It's that kind of reminds me of the experience that I had when I came out of my marriage. I had a friend and we would go out for a meal, for lunch or something. And I would always be asked, well, where would you like to eat? And I would always say, oh, I don't care, wherever you want to go. And they would like, no, where do you want to go? And I would like, I had no idea, because up to that point in time, I wasn't really allowed to have an opinion on where we were going to eat, because inevitably, if I gave one, it would be the wrong one and we'd end up somewhere else. So I just thought the easiest thing to do is to never be wrong, is to never have an opinion on stuff. And I, much to my surprise, found out I'm not the only one who thinks that way, unfortunately.
Many women are trained into that by, well, you're not supposed to be conflictive, and you're supposed to, make sure everybody around you is happy, and you're supposed to make sure that, the group is good together. And so, well, you just put all of your opinions and ideas aside in order to make sure everybody else is happy.
Yeah.
And people are very willing to let your opinion go so that they can be happy.
Yeah. So one of the ways that we come to these conclusions about ourselves are through influences that we've just been talking about through our stories. But social paradigms are explanations that are popularly used to explain the nature of humans. So one of them is genetic determinism. So this is where your grandparents and your great-grandparents did it to you. You inherit the fighting Irish trait, and that's why you're so quarrelsome, is because, well, you're Irish in your background, and that's what Irish people do. You have a bad temper because it's in your DNA. So that's one story that gets told. Another one that's quite popular is psychic determinism. It's your parents' fault. Your parents brought you up, and you remember the way it felt when you were punished for something, or you felt rejected or were compared to someone else. And so that just ingrained the story in you. And so if your parents had been better parents, you wouldn't be such the mess you are. And then we have environmental determinism. If only your boss wasn't such a jerk, or your spouse, or your teenager, or the customers that you have to deal with. If only the economy was better and there was no climate change. Something or someone in your environment is responsible for what's going on in your life.
Yeah, it really, we see this so often in that it's everybody else's fault that things are the way they are, but we don't ever say that. We're not going to blame them for it, but we're going to say, well, this happened, and well, I couldn't do anything about it, and that's the way that is, and I can't do anything about that, and this is the way that is, and well, I don't know what to do about that, and we just let ourselves into this hole where everybody can dump all their excuses on top, and then we don't know how to get out of it. And it's really because we don't take self-responsibility seriously. And that's one of the things I love about natural bioenergetics, is that it is a self-responsibility model. We don't heal anybody. We're not healers. Only you can heal yourself. I am the only one who will ever heal me. That doesn't mean that other people won't have a hand in it, that I won't go see somebody who will provide me samples and examples and frequency patterns and information and help that will allow me to do that. But it's self-responsibility is such a huge thing that has been so removed from our culture and from our ability to function. And it's always, well, somebody else is pushing this. And so I have to do this because, or I have to do that because. And it's not about I'm doing this for me. And in that I need to do this for me is seen as a selfish and uncaring and unfit attitude. And that's something we really need to change.
So one of the things that all those three paradigms have in common is that they provide a socially acceptable reason for being the victim of your life. People generally fall into one of two categories. They're either a victim or they're an owner. So what distinguishes the life of a victim from what I call an owner? Well, the victim is never in control. The results they have are always due to circumstances that they're in, or they're caused by other people. And unfortunately, that's our natural default as people. We tend to, as a rule, we tend to view ourselves as victims. So what we'll do is if something goes wrong, we look around for who can we blame, or maybe it's our situation we're in, the fate, bad luck, God, our parents, our spouse, anyone and anything that deflects attention away from our responsibility. So who hasn't seen this in action? You have kids, you ever see them fighting? And it's their fault. They're quick to point the finger of blame on the other sibling as a way of justifying their own response to a perceived insult. And who hasn't heard people blame others or their past or an ex for their own perceived failure in life?
And we often blame ourselves sort of backhandedly. Well, it's because, well, I grew up in this family and I wasn't strong enough to withstand that. And so I became this because, well, that's all I could do. And, you know, I don't have the courage to tell people to, you know, or to walk away from something. And it's my fault. And I blame myself because, well, if I blame anybody else, that's wrong. And you know, we get into these wild circles of blame of, I blame myself because they did something, which is kind of like blaming them, but backhanded. But it caused me to do this, and then I can blame myself again, and then I can blame them again. And you go in these circles that, yeah, there's ways to stop that.
So one of the things that we don't want to do is belittle those who have truly suffered devastation at the hands of another person. These people truly are victims. But the good news is that victimhood doesn't need to rule their destiny or govern their every waking moment. Some of us have real experience in escaping from the chains of oppression and from oppressive thoughts that tend to grow out of them. A good example of that would be the book that was written by Viktor Frankl, a man who was in a Nazi prison camp. And he lost his parents, he lost his wife, he lost, I think it was a sister or a daughter. And he discovered that the one thing that he had control of was how he thought about himself and his situation. It was the one area of freedom that his oppressors couldn't touch. And as a result of that knowledge and his ability to shift and reframe his life, he was not only able to rise above his situation, he also inspired many other people because of it. So what are some of the signs or clues that we have fallen into a victim mentality? Well, the victim mentality rests on three key beliefs. Bad things happen and will keep happening. Other people or circumstances are to blame, and any efforts to create change will fail. So there's no point in trying. So one of the first things that people will do is they'll avoid responsibility. This might involve placing blame, making excuses for not taking responsibility, reacting to most of life's hurdles with, it's not my fault. Bad things really do happen, often to people who've done nothing to deserve it. And it's understandable that people who face one difficulty after another may start to believe that the world is out to get them. But many situations do involve varying degrees of personal responsibility. Consider job loss, for an example. It's true some people lose their jobs without a good cause, but it's also often the case that there's some sort of underlying factor that plays a part. And someone who fails to consider those reasons may not learn or grow from the experience and could end up facing the same situation again. So when I came out of my marriage, I didn't want to spend the rest of my life alone. And whenever I go into something new, I do a lot of reading. So one of the things I did was I went out and I got a whole pile of books on divorce, what happens to people who go through divorce. And some of the information was actually encouraging. So one of the popular myths out there is if you divorce, your children are going to be a complete mess and they'll never recover and they'll just repeat it on and on. But what the studies have actually shown is if you have at least one parent who's providing a stable life for the children and providing a good example of values and stuff, the children will actually do quite well. The other thing I figured out after doing some reading was that if I didn't change my patterns of behavior, I was likely to invite the same sort of situation back into my life again. And what was amazing to me was to see the parallels between the abuse that I was undergoing in my marriage and the abuse that I was undergoing in the church I had been in at the time. And so one of my goals was to figure out how to change those patterns, because if I wanted a different result, I had to do something different. So, and this is where we get to the difference between a victim and an owner is victims are characterized by a tendency towards an action. Very often a small change will change an outcome, but they've either been conditioned to not even try, or they've learned to enjoy wallowing in their misery. And some wallowing after a terrible event is to be expected, but it shouldn't become your lifelong pattern.
I posted something in the Facebook page this week that I think is every one of us should have it posted in front of our eyes every day. And that is that we love to talk about all the bad things that are happening to us. And we need to replace that love of talking about the bad things with talking about the wonderful things and the moments of joy and the happiness that pervade our environment, whether we like it or not. And many of us almost don't want those happy moments showing up because, well, they interrupt the pattern, and the patterns, you know, I'm just plowing along here. I just survive. I just do the same thing every day. I make it happen, and heaven forbid that joy should come through, because that interrupts the pattern. And what do we do? And yeah, we really need to take that proactive stance of changing and allowing change to happen in order to shake things up. And it's so important that we make those changes in order to not pass on the patterns and not keep perpetuating the patterns.
So many people who feel victimized believe that they lack power to change their situation. That would be the next screen.
Okay, sorry, is that one? Sorry. Thank you.
They don't enjoy feeling downtrodden and would love for things to go well, but life continues to throw situations at them. And, some of this ties into the wallowing. And one day when I was working with my coach, he said something to me I took great offense at too. He said, one of the reasons that I didn't want to, that I was in the patterns I was in was because they worked for me. And I looked at him like he had three heads. I'm like, what do you mean they worked for me? You think I enjoyed this? He said, well, yeah, actually it did work for you. And it took me a while to figure out what it was. What it was I was doing. I was driving to church one day and it suddenly hit me. People would come to me and say, Cheryl, would you like to help us out with doing such and so? And I'd go, just a moment. I need to go and ask my husband. So that I'd go and ask my husband, who would always, always answer no. And then I could go back to them and say, I'm so sorry. My husband won't allow me. And it was a win-win because I got out of doing something I didn't really want to do. And it made him look like a jerk and people felt sorry for me. And that was my win.
And you didn't have to say no.
Yeah, I didn't
have to take self-responsibility.
That's right. It worked. And that's why I did it. but I wasn't doing it at the conscious level. That was the crazy thing.
The question is, do you still do it?
No, I don't. I'm way more self-aware about those sort of things now. But some women who feel powerless in their situation, for some of these people, they have actually deep-seated psychological pain, which makes change seem really impossible. And one good example of that would be people who have post-traumatic stress disorder. And the reason that PTSD arises is because we get put into a situation that's quite stressful to us, and we feel like we have no opportunity to change the way things are. You'll see this arise with a lot of women in the process of giving birth. They go into the hospital expecting to have a normal delivery, and the next thing they know, they're being railroaded or feeling railroaded by situations that cause them to end up with C-sections that they weren't prepared for. They had all their choices taken away from them, and they end up with PTSD as a result of that. So feeling victimized can contribute to beliefs such as, everything bad happens to me. I can't do anything about it, so why try? I deserve the bad things that happen to me. No one cares about me. And each new difficulty that arises reinforces these unhelpful ideas until they're firmly entrenched in their inner monologue, and it just becomes a habitual way of talking about their life and themselves. And that, of course, makes it difficult for them to bounce back and have resilience about life. So people who see themselves as victims may struggle with self-confidence and self-esteem. Well, I think they do. This makes feelings of victimization worse. And they might think things like, I'm not smart enough to get a better job, or I'm not talented enough to succeed. And this perspective keeps them from developing the skills that would help them to be better. So it becomes a negative, self-fulfilling goal. Those who do try to work toward what they want and fail may see themselves as the victim of circumstances again. And the negative lens they view themselves with can make it difficult for them to see any other possibility other than failure.
And that often shows itself up as shame.
Yes.
Because their self-esteem, it has been so distorted that when everything happens to them and they have no, what we would say, agency or power in their life to make choices, they feel like they don't have the options available to them, then they become ashamed of their life, and they become ashamed of the fact that they can't seem to find or get any power or use any power. And it becomes this vicious cycle of the self-esteem is low, so they become ashamed, and they attach shame to their work and to their family, and it just keeps going down and down and down. It's like digging a well of self-pity that ends up with all these side effects of being completely powerless.
Mm-hmm. The victim mentality can take a real toll on a person's emotional well-being. So a lot of people will end up feeling frustration, anger, and resentment because they end up suppressing really vital parts of who they are and who they were created to be. And they have to deny a lot of their character traits and their bents and the things that they were that they're attracted to. So people who are frustrated and angry with the world feel hopeless about their circumstances. And one of the things it does is it causes almost an atrophy of the soul and an atrophy of your ability to even know what you're feeling anymore, because you have to bury it so deep, and the only thing that you have access to is anger.
And when you have that kind of anger, especially if it's not safe to express it in any way, which for many people it's not, then depression and isolation and loneliness become your existence. And even though you might be in a family with people around you, and you have kids, or you have a husband, and you have friends, you feel depression and isolation and loneliness because you don't want to have an angry outburst, but that's the only emotion you have available to you. And I have said for many years that depression is anger turned inwards. You're
Absolutely.
angry at your situation and your environment, but you're not allowed to express that in any way, or there is no way to express it safely. And so you express it to yourself and it becomes depression. And many people who are deeply depressed are depressed because they are angry at everyone else and not allowed to do that. And they have lost that part of their soul, lost access to that part of their soul that sustains them. And depression, loneliness, and isolation become their only existence.
So where does this come from? So you can skip through to the next one. To an outsider, someone with a victim mentality might seem overly dramatic, but this mindset often develops in response to true victimization. It can emerge as a method of coping with abuse or trauma. Facing one negative circumstance after another can make this outcome more likely. Not everyone who experiences traumatic situations goes on to develop a victim mentality, but people who react to adversity in different ways. Emotional pain can disrupt a person's sense of control, contributing to feelings of helplessness until they feel trapped and they give up. Some people who take on the role of victim might seem to enjoy blaming others for problems they cause. They lash out and make others feel guilty, or they manipulate them for sympathy and attention. Toxic behavior like this may often be associated with being the victim of someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder, for example. Then there's the betrayal of trust, especially repeated betrayals. These make people feel like victims, and it makes them hard to trust others. If your primary giver, for example, rarely followed through on any commitment to you as a child, you may have a hard time trusting other people down the line. This mindset also can develop alongside codependency. So a codependent person may sacrifice their goals to support their partner. As a result, they seem frustrated and resentful, but they never getting what they need without acknowledging their own role in the situation.
Coming back to the self-responsibility and the self-awareness, many people are completely unaware that they don't trust people. They don't even know that that's what they're doing, and that they feel betrayed, and that it stems from something that's happened repeatedly in their childhood, or even from their parents and their early caregivers. And so then they have this boundary that they create where they won't let anybody close, and they destroy their own relationships because they can't trust anybody to get close. And everything is seen as a betrayal. And all of these layers of things need to be worked through. And most people are completely unaware that that's there. And that's why the self-responsibility and self-awareness is such a huge piece that comes up in so much of the energy work and so much of the coaching.
So what's the payoff? So just like my story, there was a payoff for me in terms of being a victim. Constantly being a victim can look a lot like the following. You don't have to take responsibility for things that you have the right to. You don't have to take responsibility for things, and you have the right to complain and receive attention. Other people will feel sorry for you and give you attention. People are less likely to criticize or upset you, and other people will feel compelled to help you and do what you ask. So you can tell stories about the things that happened to you to make you look interesting to other people. There's no time to be bored because there's so much drama in your life, and you can avoid ever feeling anger as you're too busy being sad and upset. So let's look at the owner now. We spent quite a bit of time talking about what it's like to be a victim. Now let's contrast the victim with the owner and see if you can spot the difference. So, would you rather have this or this? I want you to listen for the difference. I'm going to read to you some of the things that you commonly hear from people. So a victim will say things that life uses them. Life did this to me, or life did that to me, or these people did this or that. And I just have to get through life. Life is not something to be enjoyed and indulged in. You just have to get through it. Or I should do these things, or I ought to do these things, or I'm obligated to, or I have to live up to expectations. I'm swamped, I'm overwhelmed. Why does things like this always happen to me? Who can I blame? I'm forced to. Happiness is based on people, places, and things. I don't want to think about these problems. Why am I the way I am? Those are victim type of language. An owner, however, will use life as a platform for building what they want. They gain from each event. Things may be negative, but it's a learning opportunity as opposed to being a failure. They say things like, I want to do this, or how can I do this? Not, I can't do this. They ask, what can I do about a situation? And when you ask those types of questions, it opens up the possibility of creativity and the ability to find what you need in order to get past a situation. So I like to compare an owner and a victim as being the difference between being a thermostat or a thermometer. A thermostat is something that sets the environment. It controls the environment. You can turn it up or you can turn it down. However, a thermometer only measures what's going on and is always going up or down in response to what's going on around them. So I don't know about you, but I actually have learned to enjoy setting the pace and setting the environment as opposed to just constantly being out of control and responding to what's going on around me and not being able to, that sense of powerlessness that goes with being a victim. Once you've learned how to own your life instead of being at the whim of everybody else, there's no going back. So my thing is not working here. Oh, here we go. So as human beings, we're responsible for our own lives, or we should be. Healthy behavior is a function of our decisions, not our conditions, sorry. Let me say that again. Healthy behavior is a function of our decisions, not our conditions. We can subordinate our feelings to our values, and we have the initiative and the responsibility to make things happen. Just look at the word responsibility. It's response ability. It's the ability to choose your response to something. And highly proactive people recognize that responsibility. They don't blame other people. They don't blame their circumstances. Their behavior instead is a result of the values that they have in their life that they want to live out instead of just constantly reacting to everything that's going on around them. And so learning how to talk about your life, about your past, about things that are going on around you, about creating the story that you're making about what happens in your life also enables you to recognize other people's story. And when you can recognize the story-making process in yourself and in others, you actually gain a huge advantage because now you have the ability to respond to what's going on and what's driving their story as opposed to just constantly reacting and creating messes. So that's all I have to say.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I think it's really helpful if we can even go down to the very sort of root of how story develops. And we have emotions, and emotions are simply energy in motion. They're those things that arise at the gut level or from the heart level, which we don't necessarily even have a word for. They're just that feeling, that initial energy response. And then we decide what that means. We put a story on it. So I have a twinge in my back, and I can put a story on it. Oh, I must have slept wrong, and so now I have pain, and whatever. Or a different story we can put on it is, oh, maybe I need to stretch a little bit. Let's get up and walk around a little bit and have a little stretch, as opposed to, oh, I slept wrong, so now I have this pain that I have to deal with, and it's gonna, cement that emotion in there, as opposed to, oh, let's get up and move it around. The story we put onto the feeling determines how we respond to it. And the words we use to describe the things that happen are really the beginning of the story that we build around it. And everything that we do, we have these emotions, which simply are. They aren't good. They aren't bad. They aren't anything except some energy that's moving somewhere, until we put a story onto it and make it into something and cement it and create a more physical thing out of it. And the language we use to talk about those kinds of things is really where our stories start. And so we really need to catch ourselves and really think about what it is that we're describing to the actions and activities and emotions that happen to us during the day. And even catching those little things at the very beginning help us to change our stories and help us change the way we view life and view ourselves and move from it. And those are the building blocks of resilience. And tomorrow, what we want to talk about are what we call the 5 pillars, the 5 key aspects of your life that you need to have in place and functioning in order to control your story, to control the narrative, and to develop the kind of life that you want, where you are driving the bus instead of everybody else's expectations driving your bus for you, where you get to make the choices that are right for you based on your values and based on your own choices. And that doesn't mean that you don't take into consideration your family and your community and your work fellows and all the rest of it, but that you actually have agency and power to do what's also right for you, and not only what's right for everyone else. So I hope you'll join us tomorrow where we talk about the 5 pillars and share a little bit more about resilience. And I hope this has really helped you gain a better understanding of how victim mentality creeps into our lives in ways that we don't even notice it's there. And it's not that we want to do any victim blaming. It's not, oh, it's your fault that you did this to yourself. But it's simply becoming aware of how those things show up in our lives, and that we do have choices to do it differently. And that no matter what's happened, there's always another explanation and another way around it. And it's finding the options and the opportunities that allow us to make changes, that give us that wiggle room to do something different, so that we're not stuck in the same place. So I hope you'll join us tomorrow. Please go into the Facebook group, Stress Resilience, and tell us what spoke to you tonight. Share what things you really relate to. Give us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll talk to you tomorrow.